Now to the new revelations in a fresh interview with NSA leaker Edward Snowden. The extensive profile in Wired magazine is based on hours of interviews conducted over 3 days, including audio that captures Snowden's voice.
What I did was not to benefit myself. I didn't ask for money. I gave this information back to public hands. And the reason that I did that was not to gain a label, but to give you back a choice about the country you want to live in.
Snowden discloses that the U.S. government ran a top-secret cyber war program codenamed Monster Mind. He said it could accidentally start a war. And he reveals that in 2012, NSA hackers mistakenly shut down all of Syria's internet service. Edward Snowden has been living in Russia since 2013. Last week, that asylum was extended by 3 years. Journalist and Wired contributor James Bamford has written extensively about U.S. surveillance for decades and is the author of the latest story, which appears in the September issue. He joins me now from Rio de Janeiro. James Bamford, you say in your piece that you feel like you have a kinship with Edward Snowden. Why did he talk to you?
Well, hello, Gwen. Nice being on the program. The reason I think that we had a bit of a kinship was, interestingly, I worked also for NSA in Hawaii when I was in the Navy. I was assigned to a unit that was basically part of the NSA, and I worked there during the Vietnam War for basically 2 years out of 3 years I spent in the Navy. And then after I left the active duty and was in the reserves while I was in law school, I discovered at one of the listening posts that they were eavesdropping on U.S. citizens. And so I blew the whistle on that to the church committee and actually testified in closed session before the church committee. So these were some of the things that I think we had a bit in common. He was far more of a whistleblower than I ever was, and he was far more involved with NSA than I ever was. But there were these connections that we did have.
It's been widely reported that 1.7 billion documents were taken by Edward Snowden in some manner. Do you happen to know whether he knows what was in all of those documents and whether there is indeed a second leaker, as has been reported?
Yeah, it was 1.7 million documents, but
thank you for fixing that.
His comments, I think, were really extraordinary to me. He said that he actually left basically breadcrumbs. He left some clues to indicate which documents he actually saw and which documents he actually copied, so that the NSA, when they went back and did an audit, would be able to determine that he was a whistleblower. In other words, taking documents that indicated they were involved domestic eavesdropping, for example, as opposed to documents dealing with North Korea or Russia or China or whatever. So he did say how many documents, but he said there were considerably fewer than the 1.7 million that the NSA has alleged. And that 1.7 million is basically based on the documents he may have at one point seen, but certainly not the documents that he copied. And by them missing the clues that he left, they aren't able to tell which he saw and which he actually copied.
And which of the reports we've seen have come from his documents and come from possibly someone else?
Well, that's the indication, and what Edward Snowden said to me was that the NSA certainly has a problem if things are still going walking. And he said that's a major problem to the U.S. since the NSA has so much of American communications, telephone calls, emails, and so forth. And if there is a second leaker, which apparently there is, and certainly the evidence indicates that, and maybe having been inspired by Edward Snowden, that's certainly a major problem for NSA. If they thought they had a problem with Snowden, now they have a problem with somebody else there.
What kind of life is Edward Snowden leading in exile these days?
He seems fairly comfortable in his life. The 3 days I spent with him, he never complained about his life there. I think he's adapted to the life in Moscow quite well. Moscow is not your grandfather's Russia under Khrushchev. This is a much more modern city, and I think it's a very livable city in terms of somebody who may be spending a considerable amount of time there. He just had his visa extended for another 3 years, so I think obviously he'd be much rather living in the U.S. with his family and so forth, but I think he's adapting quite well.
And he expects to be hacked at any moment by the U.S. government?
Well, he certainly thinks that they're trying to hack into him. He says that he thinks it will be inevitable that they will be able to hack into him at some point. He doesn't think they've geolocated him. In other words, found out exactly where he is at any particular time in Moscow. He takes his battery out of his cell phone when he's going places. He's very careful, but he does think that at some point NSA will probably be able to understand who he's talking to, not necessarily what he's saying because of encryption, but who he's communicating with, and that troubles him.
Do he and his supporters have any concern about something you describe in the article as NSA fatigue, that is, Americans losing interest in his cause?
Yeah, he did. He was quite concerned that at some point the information that's coming out will pretty much be put on the back pages. People won't pay attention to it anymore. Sort of compared it to a war in the sense that 5 people being killed is a headline, 1,000 people being killed a month later is a back page. So it's a problem of becoming sort of numbed, or this whole problem of boiling frogs, where a frog is in the water and the heat gets turned up slowly so the frog doesn't know he's being boiled. So it's a problem that I think he's concerned about, that the public will stop paying attention to the leaks and the revelations at some point.
And for that reason, he poses with an American flag on the cover of Wired magazine this month. James Bamford, thank you for your reporting. Talk to you soon.